Hi, Vincent Hall, and welcome to another episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create. Last week, we were looking at high-key drawings done in graphite, and the week before that, we were looking at low-key drawings also done in graphite. So today, we're going back to color, although you're welcome to try this in regular graphite pencil if you don't feel up to the challenge yet of what we're going to try, because we're going to take something that's just completely white, in this case, an egg, or 3, because I always liked odd numbers for composition, against a neutral background. Now that's going to be one of our challenges. The second is we're going to interpret those white eggs as color. It doesn't have to be Easter egg, and we don't have to make the whole thing bright and shiny, but we're going to be using color instead of grays to shade an object that's white. So what I'm going to use for my resource on this is one of my favorite books that I've always used for teaching by Johannes Itten called The Color Star. The Color Star is a whole color theory in a pamphlet, and it allows you to see all the different color combinations. It's pretty much one of the go-tos for anyone who does painting or works in color. And I'm using from inside this book, which has many different color possibilities, the very basic one, our primary colors. So here we have yellow, blue, and red, our 3 primaries. And you can see here, it's already showing me the tint to the shade of yellow by blending it in with its complementary colors, the tints of the reds, and the tints of the blues. We're going to be taking 3 eggs and changing 1 to be in tints of yellows, 1 to be in tints of blues, and 1 in tints of reds. So, and a little bit of shade and shadows as well, but mostly these eggs are white, so they're going to be in the lighter forms of those colors, and see what happens with this. This is an excellent exercise for painters. You might be thinking, I'm a painter, not a drawer, but you're also a colorist if you're a painter. So trying to blend colors and trying to see what happens when you add the complements of those colors, but try to keep them within that family is a challenge. Now, if you're a very beginner and you're saying, whoa, this is too much for me, that's okay too. Because all I'm going to be hoping you'll try is to get the shape of the egg, even if you're using graphite pencil or whatever object you choose, it doesn't have to be an egg, and doing the background in a technique called linear background drawing, which is going to be just one line direction. Now, we did do some line work last week in high key, but I started changing the directions to make it more like crosshatch almost. This background is strictly going to be vertical lines, and for an added brain teaser, I'm not going to draw the outline of the egg first. I'm going to stop my background lines to follow around the shape of the eggs. It's something fun to try, even if you don't like to do a lot of drawing and things, but this is going to give you like a brain teaser in a way, and that's always fun to challenge ourselves, almost like a puzzle. Where does that line stop so that I can draw the negative space around a simple object? So let's see what we're going to use and get started. Here's my still life setup, and I really like to cast shadows on these 3 eggs. Notice I have some brown cushioning underneath it. That's just a little pillowcase because, as I found out, eggs don't want to stay on a hard surface without rolling around. I also created a space so it's a more interesting composition by having a gap between these 2, but overlap on the 2 here. It creates a little bit of visual tension, and that's also interesting. Notice too, I have a pretty fair amount of negative space. This would be called 2/3 negative space or reverse rule of thirds, because all my eggs are in my lower third, and then I have pretty much nothing up here. So I'm going to keep that as my vertical format to try to make this a little more interesting. We're going to start by taking a pencil, and a colored pencil in this case, and drawing all the outlines around the back and the sides of these eggs and the shadows. I can interpret this gray any color I want. So I might be interpreting it in gray, but I also might be interpreting it in brown. I'm going to wait and see which I have more pencils of. But in either case, it's going to be a neutral color because these eggs are going to take on a persona of our primary colors, and we don't want the background to be more important than the foreground. I decided to go with brown color pencils for my neutral color instead of gray because although they do have a myriad of gray colored pencils, most of what I would have would either be using black and white, which we've done a lot, or using graphite, which would work. But I promised this week would be primarily color pencil, and I'm going to keep it that way because after we do this linear background, I'll show you another option for blending that you might want to try. As promised, I'm going to keep a vertical format for these eggs. Actually, I'm going to use this side, but I am using my paper horizontally, primarily because it's easier for you to see on the screen, but also because I don't need to make this huge. It can overpower itself. So all I'm going to do is look at my first egg, which is in the background, and I'm not drawing the shapes first. I mean, normally, just to show you, over here, you know, we'd be doing these little gestural drawings, and that's all fine. But what we're trying to do is use our brains to do negative space drawing first. This is an exercise I did with my beginner drawing class several times. Not sure if they liked it or not, but it did work. So it's just drawing a series of lines that will roughly follow the shape of the egg, and we can refine this later, but I'm just drawing the negative space or anything that I see around the egg, or in this case, eggs plural. If this is all you try, then you know what? That's fine too, because this in and of itself is an excellent right brain thinking technique. If you don't do anything else but this, you're engaging your right brain. Now I'm doing the added no-no of talking while I'm trying to use my right brain, which can cause some trouble, but you can see here I'm starting to get this egg shape by not drawing any lines at all. Then I'm seeing my shadow, and I'm coming around to this egg. And notice I'm just going vertical lines. Some people are better at going down to top. I'm better at going top to bottom. It's just a matter of hand control and preference and what you want to do. And you can do short strokes or long strokes, whatever might float your boat. Now here, where those two eggs connect, I am not going to connect them right now. And I'm going to just go back here and get my outline, and then I can draw in my vertical lines to fill in this negative space. But I'm not shading back and forth. I'm just doing vertical line, vertical line, vertical line. Now if I want to tweak this egg, because this egg wound up having a point, and we don't want a pointy egg, at least I hope we don't. And then I'm just going to go in here a little bit. So we can refine these egg shapes, the outside areas of them, by doing this little vertical line. And you could fill this in as much or as little as you want. I'm going to kind of keep some of this area in an interesting shape rather than coloring in my whole paper, but hey, if you want to do that, that's fine too. Now, what we can do to make it more interesting is take a different color brown or gray or whatever you might have and kind of go back through and follow some of these shapes, the outlines, again, just doing vertical line and maybe not doing the second color everywhere, but maybe just in certain areas, because this will give us a nice sense of our negative space and just liven it up a little bit so it's not so, for lack of a better word, blah. Okay, I think that's all I'll do there. Then my eggs have shadows. So since the shadows also fall on this background, I'm going to take, again, my darkest brown here, but press a little bit harder, doing a second layer where I see the shadows being cast around these eggs. And in this case, the shadow from the top or the furthest back egg, it's not really on top, it's furthest behind, also creates the outline for the egg that's in front of it, and then it disappears. This is just another really fun way to do shading. And if you're a painter, you could do this with a brush, just going one direction. Most painters would probably then find they'd want to blend it in. And I am going to show you a technique with a brush with water, because you guessed it, I am still enamored with the fact that I can use water with my Prismacolors to try to get the shadows of what I have here. And let's see. Now, it's okay too if you run out of room, because in this case, there's a lot more shadow over here for that second egg, but I don't really need it. I'm just going to keep this all relatively dark, and then just do some shorter little lines where this shadow is here for this egg, and this one here, where it's a cast shadow. Let's see. Oh, and right here, this one kind of goes straight back, so I'm going straight. Okay, so here's what we have so far. You can see the outlines. I didn't draw any of this first. It was not this. I mean, you're welcome to do that, but this exercise is showing negative space. It's also very easily controlled. You're in control of how fast you put your vertical strokes down. So if you're a little bit intimidated by this, go slow. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Time to get started on some of the colors and finish the inside of these eggs. So here's our 3 eggs again, and here is the drawing of the outline of the egg. So I think I pretty much got the shapes that I want, these oblong kind of eggy shapes. Still a little bit of a point here, but I can get rid of that in a second. What we're going to do now is fill in these areas with colors, and each egg is going to be its own primary color. I think I'm going to do yellow, blue, and red, because red is a dominant color and I don't want it fighting with these other 2 eggs. So red stands alone in this case. I just wanted to show you that I have my blue, red, and yellow pencils. Now, I have my fancy set. So I have a light, medium, and dark blue, a light, medium, and dark red, and a light, medium, and dark yellow. So if you don't have that, just one of each, a yellow, red, and a blue pencil, that's fine. We can do a lot with those just by the amount of pressure that you use. Time to get started on those eggs. So we have our eggs negative space shapes by doing these rough lines, and now we're going to plan to do our primary color eggs, but not have them read like Easter egg colors. So I'm going to start with yellow, and I'm using just a basic yellow pencil, so if you don't have light, medium, and dark, don't worry about it at all. Most of the egg is white, but what I'm going to do is just shade in the areas that I see as a bit of a shadow and not the highest highlight of this egg. So I'm ignoring some of this top part and I'm just lightly drawing in. You could do shading whichever way you want. I'm just going to keep lines so that we're sort of on the same page. Then with the red, the same thing. And I see the darkest shadows of my red primary color egg here. And I'm just going to add in the red where I see it. It's going to look a little strange right now, but it hopefully will read more like what we're trying to do in just a minute. Interestingly, this egg here does not have a shadow from another egg touching it, so it's really actually the darkest red right in the middle, and then it gets a little lighter, so I just added a little bit there. Then I'm going with my basic blue and following this last egg. Now this egg in the front is what we would call foreshortened, which means I'm not getting that side view of the egg. It's kind of tilted back just a little bit. So again, the shadow on this egg just goes a little bit darker in the middle, and then it gets a little lighter on the end. But we have to be careful to see where we see the shadow change so that we aren't getting this just all white. We want to show some definition. Now I'm going to go get my darkest areas with my darkest yellow. Again, if you don't have a dark yellow, I'm going to show you a way to fix that with just using the complementary color for shading. But since I have it, I'm going to use this, and I have to know where to skip. So it's highlighted here, and then there's a shadow again down here for this egg. And it kind of just has a little bit of a shadow there. There we go. Then my red, I'm getting my darker red and just following along the outline. Now I'm going to go back and forth a little bit on this one because I feel like I have a little more control, kind of doing more of your traditional way of shading something just to get that darkest shadow laid in. And then I'm going to take my darkest blue and go the opposite direction where I see a really dark area in this dark blue egg. And they're still looking weird because they don't have any shadow and they also don't have a lot of contrast. I'm going to take my lightest blue now and just lightly dust over some of this area because this isn't really white. There's a tint of this color. I'm going to take my lightest yellow or take your regular and just press ever so lightly. You almost can't see it. And the same thing with my lightest red, which is really just touching lightly because A light red would be more of a pink, and I really don't want to go that route. So I'm just giving it a little bit of a tint. If you get those lines, no big deal. Now, to make this not look as weird as it does right now, we're going to use the complementary colors to make these shadows on the sides of the eggs pop. So if you remember from our color wheel, the opposite of yellow is purple. So I'm going to find my purple pencil, which is right here. And the opposite of red is green. So I'm finding my green pencil. And the opposite of blue is orange. So I am going to find my orange pencils. So there we are with those. And we are going to start, I'm going to start with the red. So I'm going to use my green and start to use the green to show where I see the darkest shadows on this egg that is white that I am trying to translate into a primary color. And then the key is go over it again with your red. Let's find our regular red, not the dark red. If you don't go over the green with the red, what you're going to wind up with is a weird green shadow, and that's probably not what you want either. But you can see that gives you a nice shadow and tone. I'm just gonna lightly tone in this egg a little bit, and I can blend it in with my finger or whatever. Blue is going to be orange. So here's our orange pencil. And I'm gonna go over these blue areas. And again, the weird thing is on this one, it's not the shadow on the bottom. It kind of comes along the side of the egg and comes up here a little bit. So I really have to be careful where I'm putting this orange because I wanna make sure I'm going back over it with my basic blue. This is the absolute key to getting these darker colors of these primary colors, is to use their complement, but then go back over it. I'm just gonna give a little more tone on this egg here. Got a little too dark there. Then I'm going to take my purple. Make sure I have purple, yep. And we're going to go over the darkest parts of the yellow again, because this is also going to help to define this egg that's in front. So it's really key that I get this yellow nice and dark where I see that it's darker. And then it goes really dark down here again where it's behind this egg because the front egg's casting a shadow. Now you don't have to do a still life. I'm using a simple white object to show you how to turn it into color, but you could just do this with a landscape, but turn everything into primary colors. I mean, think fall and how the leaves change color. There's some green leaves and there's some red leaves. There's some orange leaves. There's probably not blue, but you could probably find some purpley colors and yellows too if you look hard. Then we'll go back to our basic yellow and go back over the purple, and you can see it's starting to shade that egg in a little bit. Then we can go back over here, bring in a little more of a highlight where I see it and start to get these shadows. Now this is all well and good for what it is, but fix this egg a little bit. We want to show the shadows that the eggs are casting as objects. Otherwise, these are like three floating orbs and I have no idea what they are. So I'm gonna take my darkest color if you have it. If you only have one color red, then just use it pressing harder. But I'm going to draw in the shadow of the egg with the darkest color of whatever I made that egg. So if it's the red egg, it's going dark. Red, sorry. I get involved. If I'm doing my blue egg, it's my darkest blue where I see the shadow. And that's not my darkest blue. Here it is. Sorry. Sometimes these colors under these lights look very similar, and then they're not when you put them on the paper. So we're going here. And this dark shadow, and again, for me, this shadow would continue over here, but I'm cutting off my paper a little bit. And I can see the shadow goes all the way behind this egg and then just a little bit in the front. And then my yellow, I'm going to my darkest yellow, which for me is like a yellow ochre, but you might have a different yellow and that's fine too, or just one yellow and just simply press harder. That's all you have to do. The key is to get the shape of what this shadow is doing. If it comes down into this egg a little bit, that's what we want to see. There's a little bit of a gap here between these two. I'm gonna go back to my darkest blue and bring the shadow up just a little bit more so that there is some definition between these shadows. Then I'm gonna go back to my red where I see I still need a little more depth right here. So I'm pressing harder, almost blending this in because it does kind of taper back more on an angle. And we can get this little rounded area in here. It's key to draw these negative shapes. Negative shapes or shadows or the background space or whatever it might be. Okay, so now we have our egg drawing with the colors and we need to blend these in to make it look a little more round. But you could probably leave it like this if you wanted to. It's a nice little exercise to try. I often talk about using a Q-tip to blend instead of a blender, so I'll just show you the difference. There's really minimal, but if you want to blend, and painters, if you were going this way with your paint while it's wet, then go the opposite way for blending. Here's the Q-tip. It's going to keep the lines, but it's just going to blur them ever so lightly and give you a very soft, kind of almost just a very gentle blend. If you have a blender like I do here, this is going, if you press in, blend much more easily, going the opposite direction and kind of obliterate some of those lines. So again, it's an aesthetic choice. If you want your lines to be more pronounced or more vague. I kind of like the blender for the shadows at least, because I don't want those shadows to look like they're a shape popping out and competing with my eggs. So I'm gonna kind of blend those in a little bit. And then definitely blending the egg, because we do want that to not look so, you could have it rough, I guess, actually, if you want, but I'm just trying to go through and soften this a little bit so it has a little more of a 3D effect, but you're still gonna show the grain of the paper and everything. So that's gonna be part and parcel. And then taking my eraser, making sure it's clean. I can also use this side of the paper just to clean off the edge, and finding my highest highlights and erasing back out. And on each egg, those highlights are in a different place. So this little one in the front has a highlight that kind of already comes down here. And again, if you remember last week, we were cutting the eraser. I could use a cut eraser probably here, would be very beneficial as I'm looking at this to get that little edge there. And if I see shadows that are too harsh, because on a rounded edge, it's all about subtle, I can lightly press with my eraser and kind of just blend all this in, just to give it a little bit of oomph, and then go around my edge with my eraser to show where, again, this edge highlight is on this top egg, because the light that I'm using is giving a lot of light and highlight reflection off of a white surface. There we go. Then I'm just gonna lightly go through here and soften some of these a little bit. And I could leave it like this, and it definitely reads, you know, eggs or at least orbs or objects. But I'm gonna show you another idea using water to kind of really bring this drawing home. So here are my eggs, and we're going to go to, you guessed it, the water for the background. So if you decide after you've drawn in this, because this was a good brain teaser, but it might not be the look you're going for, remember adding a little bit of water to the colored pencil is going to just ever so slightly soften this in and give us this nice unified look. So you can see it's starting to blend in. It's going to take some time here to do this, but I just wanted to especially go over the egg shapes and kind of give them a little more oomph using water to get that rounded look, because water will give you a 3D look, and then painters, you can see where you could go with this as far as unifying your background to your foreground by picking up some of these colors in the shadows. Here we go. So this will just help make this look more like a finished drawing, but again, you don't have to do this. If you were doing a landscape and it was like the sky here and then your horizon line, it might be fun to do one or the other, but maybe not wet the whole thing. That way you can decide what gets more emphasis. If you're one of my drawer or painter friends that like to do animals or people, again, I would probably do the water either with the subject or the background, but not the whole thing because you'll lose the emphasis. I'm just trying to use this to help define my edges and, you know, really give me where it might be a little too soft and nice hard edge. So I'm kind of coming back in here, going around a little bit, almost like a painting, but not quite. And again, because I have just plain drawing paper, there will be some buckling. If your paper buckles and you don't like that, you can just put a book over it and let it dry. That will press most of these little bumps and crinkles out, and you should be fine with it. So just here, maybe I'll use lightly a little bit of water on my blue egg just to help this along and get those little sub definitions. But see, it's not going to take away the texture. And that's what I like about this. It's subtle. It doesn't obliterate it and turn it into a watercolor painting, not at all. It's just, you know, kind of softening things a little bit more, but it just gives you options. And art is nothing if it doesn't have options. Yes, I feel like one of those cooking shows where we have one in the oven and one ready to go. So you can see the difference. This was the water, and this is the one without. So if you like it more purist and a lot of texture or the tooth of your paper, do not use the water. If you want more depth and a little more subtle or drama in these deeper shadows, then add some water. Either way, it works. And the key was trying to use primary colors and make them work with shadows and highlights, also using their complementary colors. And if you think back, the first thing we did was draw the negative space rather than drawing the shapes like we would normally do with the line. This is definitely a challenging project, but I hope you'll give it a try. If all you want to do is do vertical lines around any object you might happen to have in the home, it could be a flower, a coffee cup, a mug, some kind of a little tchotchke thing you might have lying around, even a few books, just rectangles, just try doing those vertical lines around the negative space. That's going to force your right brain to kick in, and it's going to give you a chance to see the shape rather than your brain telling you, oh, this is a book, an egg, a coffee cup, you name it, and move on. Because our left brain wants us to just figure it out and get on with the day. Our right brain is our creative side, and it gives you a chance to see shapes and highlights and shadows and all those fun things that we deal with art. So whether you like the wet look for our 3 eggs in primary colors or the dry, give it a try. Sorry, I had to throw in a rhyme there. Yeah. Anyway, subject matter's up to you. Again, just using simple colors, primary, red, blue, and yellow. Their complements for shading, green, blue, and purple. And then just using a vertical line to outline your shapes. It's not that hard. It's worth giving it a try because that's what art is. It's all about experimenting and creating. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create. Again, we're down in the art room Tuesdays and Wednesdays if you want to stop by and say hi. Or until next week, I will see you, Vincent Hall, for another edition of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create. And in the meantime, stay safe and be well.